Thank you very much. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Travis, for your hospitality, your generosity. It's really an honor to be part of this distinguished series. First poem I'm going to read is, usually don't write such philosophical poems, so bear with me. All we are is dust in the air. I love that. You recognize me now? I wrote this poem several years ago, and I never thought it would come true, but it did come true in September. I dreamt I went to hell with Charles Schwab. He promised me a sail on his swan, but off the bay he steered wrong, and soon we faced a fork, swung by the dark one. Charles had the tender jowls of a new senator. No rent worries ever pitched their tents there, packed up, pitched again. The greasy, dented cheeks of Satan mirrored my own lumped and pointy features, no symmetry. He asked us to explain who had touched our lives, moved us most, fathered our fates, the friends who failed us. Charles confessed first. He never had a second thought, just pounced. As for me, I had only second thoughts, and therefore never. For these crimes, we were condemned to fathom each other through a kiss. Charles understood me right away. Burnt coffee, aspirin, envy. The rich man tasted familiar, like sucking a penny, a miniature copper mine, blood from a fishhook wound, and the fish, and the hook, and the wound. These next two poems I'm going to read are really homages to two of my favorite older poets, Alan Grossman and Alan Dugan. And Alan Grossman is, I guess, close to 80 now. He's won every major award, MacArthur Genius Grant, and so forth. And he has a very peculiar locution. When you hear him read, he reads like this. Wake up! He also writes sort of indecipherable essays. And he loves poems that are so complicated and complex that he feels that are transparent to him. And one time at a dinner party, a lot of the guests had left the table, and I was there alone with him. And so I said, look, I know you love Hart Crane's poems. And he said, yes, I love his poems. I said, well, I find them very difficult. And he said, they're not difficult at all. So we were going back and forth about this, and then the other guests returned, this couple returned to the table. And they said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I'm talking to Alan about Hart Crane. He says he doesn't find his poems difficult. These people were not poets. They said, well, what do you mean by difficult? And I said, well, what do you think of this line by Hart Crane? The mustard scansions of the eyes awaken salads in the brain. So they said, well, that is difficult. He says, it's not difficult at all. The scansions are the marks around the eyes, and they're the color of mustard, which is what you put on your hot dog. I like the way he accents the second syllable of hot dog. Hot dog. He must have been a Boy Scout. He also is very funny when I went out to dinner with him once in a restaurant in Boston. It was a very nice restaurant. And someone at the table had a tuna fish, and it was overdone. So they told the waiter, this tuna fish is overdone. And he said, oh, get the maitre d'. So the maitre d' comes running over. He says, oh, my apologies, my apologies. There's nothing worse in the world than overdone tuna. And Grossman says, it must be a very happy world then. Anyway, I have these tapes of him. I play them in the car. When I had my 9 and 10-year-old son, I used to play and I used to mock them. You know, believe me, he means a lot to me. But I did have some fun with him, and I would some of these lines that he would say in the poems, like as one of his lines, he quotes Seneca. And Seneca said to Nero, "No matter how many men you killed, you cannot kill your successor." So lines like that, and I would say them in Grossman's voice. So One night, my son and his friend, we were at a Little League game. They were about 9 or 10. They won the game. Never happened, but they won this one game. And my son got a hit. Never happened either. So he said, "Can you drive little Kyle home?" And I said, "Sure, I can drive little Kyle home." Little Kyle is an unfortunate kid to be in this school that had 3 Kyles, Big Kyle, and Little Kyle. And he was about that big. And he also, his mother had left him at an early age. His father, I think, made a living by mowing lawns. He was, a lot of problems. So anyway, we're driving home. They're on top of the world, and I saw the ice cream stand. I said, "Hey, you guys want to get an ice cream cone?" "Oh, man, what could be better?" I got the ice cream. We're driving home. My son, Harry, he's sitting next to me. He thinks, how could this be any better? Summer night, we won the game. I got a hit. I have an ice cream cone. He says, "Dad, do Alan Grossman for Kyle." So Kyle's in the back seat. I said, "Harry, I couldn't do that. First I'd have to tell Kyle who he is." And Kyle pops out from the back seat and says, "Who am I?" Now this poem is called Alan Grossman, Uncle Grossman. Uncle Grossman quotes the Greeks and the gods and says the great one knows when a feather falls to the field. Then he clears his throat with the sound of a brake yanked into place. Grossman, our childless nuncle, bumps his avuncular head hard against the bird feeder. As seed fills his fedora's rim, he says, "Pain makes a world that would not exist except for pain." On the way to dinner, Uncle Grossman describes his current loves, a woman with 5 bulldogs, and the nurse who sneaks him endless Xanax. Life is comic, he says, and life is tragic. Uncle G orders his favorite dish, veal pea, but does not recommend it. Although our uncle has not been born again, he booms with the strength of the just born against white chocolate, the rosary, and Galileo's fate. When a small nephew asks us to drive faster, his uncle states, "No matter how many cars you pass, you cannot pass the car ahead of you." It's a rainy evening when we see him to the bus. The long aisle of windows steams, and we wave goodbye to Uncle Grossman through the little circle of clarity he keeps rubbing clean with the heel of his fist. This next one is about Alan Dugan, who died at age 80 about 2 years ago. He won the National Book Award twice. He won it for his first book, and he won it for his last book, right before he died. He lived in Truro. I got married at his house. He lived in a solitary town. He lived the life of a solitary. One time I asked him what was his favorite poem. He loved William Carlos Williams. I asked him what was his favorite poem. I thought it was fitting for an isolated person. He chose this 2-line poem by Williams called El Hombre, and this is the poem. "It's a strange courage you give me, ancient star. Shine alone in the sunrise, toward which you lend no part." He also had a funny way. He had a deep voice from Brooklyn, and some of his lines would go like this. "It's a hard birth, a short life, and death forever, so why work?" Uncle Dugan. A van knocked down the kid playing tag. The rest of us stood on a manhole cover above Brooklyn's slurring waste and beneath the elevated train that sawed the sun and moon in two. The driver waved a fifth of 4 roses like a bad wand, and we disappeared while tenements emptied to the curb, where Alice Gallen sang Chantilly Lace, and her mother slapped her face with a sauce spoon with some tomato sauce still on it. I went home to parts of a steer bobbing in broth, and Uncle Dugan exhaling Pall Malls toward the teardrop chandelier and drinking Heaven Hill from the bottle. He said one law demands we eat well, and another keeps food from the poor. That I was lucky I stayed put on the iron disc above Smith Street's suds and shit, but should know that even though I'm safe before a placemat and a spoon, no drink or art is strong enough to undermine the fact that every victim once inhabited the crowd of witnesses like you and you and you. when I was in graduate school, I found this book in my study the other day, and it reminded me of this crush I had on a girl in graduate school because she had given me this book. And I remember that I was really in love with her, and I gave her a book to test the waters. And I signed it Love John, you know. And then she gave me the book that she bought for me, and when I opened it up, she had inscribed it, Warmest Personal Regards. So I found this, you know, a couple of years ago. And I wrote this poem. It's a little tight, it's a small poem. Warmest Personal Regards. Above her name on the note, she wrote, Warmest Personal Regards. 7 syllables, ignoring my want of her and my will. Warm, warmer, warmest. No matter how I stretch it, it turns out like the white walls of my bedroom, where vitreous floaters go insane, and her perfume makes a museum of the pillowcase. All this come about from her name on the note. You know, the book was the Book of Nightmares. And that was Book of Nightmares. A poem about my grandfather. He was a roofer. My mother's side, Italian immigrant roofer. Giovanni Bertolotti, 1876-1928. My mother's hand, a cursive trained by nuns, wrote, found downstairs, you can discard, across the packet of her father's death. Obit, vital certificate, little filler from the mirror's back pages. Flint phrases yanked from a trough of stiff-brimmed prose in the doleful tones of a medical examiner. No word of wife or child, just that he fell 6 flights from his perch on a scaffold. Rain brings out a roofer's best and worst, and my mother once drew for us the pitch of the sugar refinery's tall boiler house, where a shining statue of Jack Frost pranced the sky in a pointy hat, tossing handfuls of pure granules from a pouch. Should I describe my grandmother's life, left with 8 kids? Instead, I'll end with the snow-white sprite who did not become a, quote, victim of the weather, unquote, as the tabloid squib portrayed this immigrant's leaving his beginnings near Rome, only to land in a railroad car of pig iron in Edgewater, NJ, a town consigned to have its losses sweetened by an elf, from bay to bridge, from street to sister street. I have 2 poems here that are direct address poems. The first one's called No Name for It. A full shot glass in the desert, shimmering on the bar of the mirage. An aged singer back on her feet, dressed in gold like an autumn leaf. Someone covers your eyes from behind, a kindred sport waiting for his change. It's before soon and after late, John Gerard, when you spurn the stiff lie of sobriety and your soul lifts from its trustworthy script. The blind greeting, jocular and kind, asks a question you can't answer, Mr. S. And because you cannot guess who's there, you do not guess. The Wish Mind. Eternity might very well be the longed-for kiss you wish would stop, or the brazen ambition to live with God, now folded in the churchyard with the horse chestnuts. Eternity could simply be the 30 shots of radiation that took you 30 times until the ending didn't finish, nor the beginning start. The girl pats her forehead with a powder puff, as if dotting the letter I. She becomes an X, you change to O, and the infinite game ends always in a tie. Eternity might take the shape of a werewolf in the wish mind. The librarian bends over to look up a skirt. The howl is strong and we hear it forever. Or maybe it's the dominating seesaw in the center of the playground, whose rusty fulcrum squeals to the children. Life is long, William. Life is short, Kate. And I'm going to read. I've always been interested in the nonsense refrain. I wrote a little piece about it. I read a piece by Carl Shapiro where he said the nonsense words in a poem show what the poet couldn't express, but you know what it's about. Like there was a lover and his lass. You know, hey nani nani no. They lay down in the grass. I mean, you know what's happening. You know, hey nani nani no. Or the song that I like. It's an old one. I'm sitting in the la la, waiting for my ya ya. You know, what is that? Somehow, by the end of the song, it's very moving because it says she won't be coming home. That's what she doesn't come home. Anyway, I wanted to use something like that. So, a couple of years ago, I don't know if you remember, this woman was a child. It's an adolescent girl, was kidnapped by some religious zealots in Utah, or they found her in Utah. Anyway, they had an all-point bullet out for her, and a cop had seen her picture, and he stopped this car just on a traffic violation. He looked in the back seat, and he saw this girl, and he said, "Hey, you're so-and-so, aren't you?" And she looked at him and said, "Thou sayest." And I thought, well, that's, you know, I'd like to play with that and see if I could make it say something. So this poem is called that, Thou Sayest. With winter came surprising deaths and the predictable obituaries of those closer to stone than to breath. The deepest snow does not ask the plow, thou sayest. Rope safe to hang himself, a pack of leggy cards. These secrets broke from my neighbor's chest of drawers when he dropped between a shovel and a pail of salt. We watch them die until we die, thou sayest. Parallel rows in the snow from the unlifted feet of the old, craters in the script of their signatures. We only live so long with those we love, thou sayest. I've got a lovely bunch of coconuts, my mother chirps at the bars of a keat cage. Roll a bowl, a penny a pitch, my father replies from his spot in the shade. A bleached nurse praises their joyful way of counting back from 100. They're yours until you think they're mine, thou sayest. The last poem I'll read is the title poem from this book, The Situation. It's tough, isn't it, star, to be harangued by every strain of brimming heart? It's hard, isn't it, moon, when crowds fidget with their swizzle sticks as you brighten the bay? And head, doesn't it hurt when love ignites its pesky orbit and all logic strays? Hot, isn't it, sun? Admit it's a relief, shade, to wear camouflage while the flamboyant fade away. Go ahead, God, and blame this mess of blood and flesh on free will. That's life, isn't it, death? When guardrails along the steep drive home bristle with wreaths and bouquets. Thank you.